You won't believe what I did in the end. But let me start from the beginning. I'm just an ordinary guy who wanted peace, a quiet home, and a perfect yard. Nothing fancy, just a cozy house on a calm suburban street, with a green lawn I kept sharp as a golf course and a few rose bushes I'd been nurturing for years. My backyard was my sanctuary. You know that satisfying feeling when you crack open a cold beer after work, sit on your porch, and see every blade of grass exactly where it's supposed to be? That was my happy place. Then he moved in, Gary, the new neighbor from hell. I first saw him rumbling down the street in a beat-up pickup truck that sounded like it was coughing its last breath. He didn't wave, didn't say hello. He just stood there on his driveway, smoking, and, no joke, tossed his cigarette butt onto my lawn. That should have been my first red flag. At first, I tried to be nice. Gave him a wave, a nod. But Gary? He's one of those guys who thinks the whole world owes him something. His first hello to me came when he decided to park his rusty truck halfway on my grass because he didn't want to scratch his own curb. I walked over and said, "Hey, man, you're on my lawn." He looked at me and laughed. "It's just grass. It'll grow back." I let it slide, thinking maybe he'd get the hint. Oh, I was so wrong. Within a week, the party started. Not just a couple of beers with friends. Full-on, shake-the-walls parties until 3 a.m. Loud music, drunken yelling, and broken bottles left on the street. I called the cops once, but they basically told me, "We'll send someone when we can." No one came. But then it got personal. One morning, I walked outside and froze. My rose bushes, the ones I'd been trimming and watering for years, were destroyed. Snapped in half like someone had deliberately stomped them. I checked my security camera footage, and what do I see? Gary, stumbling home drunk at 2 a.m., laughing as he kicks my bushes over like it's some kind of game. I confronted him the next day. "You destroyed my roses," I said. He smirked. "Don't blame me. Maybe it was your dog." "I don't even have a dog." "Then get one." He chuckled and walked away. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. Gary wasn't just a bad neighbor. He was toxic. For a second, I considered just letting it go. I mean, it's just grass and flowers, right? But the very next day, his dog, this big, untrained mutt, was digging up my front yard while Gary stood there, watching. He didn't even try to stop it. I yelled, "Hey, get your dog out of my yard." And you know what he shouted back? "Relax, man, the dirt will settle." That was it. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at my dead grass and broken roses on the camera footage, and something inside me snapped. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to teach Gary a lesson he'd never forget. And trust me, you have no idea what I did in the end. But we'll get there. If part 1 was the beginning of a storm, this is where the thunder started rolling in. After the Rose incident, I tried one last time to be civil. I walked over to Gary's place, knocked on his door, and said, "Look, man, I'm just asking for a little respect here. Stay off my lawn, keep your dog out, and we'll have no problems." He laughed in my face. Laughed. "Problems? Buddy, if you can't handle a little dog poop and some noise, maybe suburbia isn't for you," he said, leaning against the doorframe like he owned the whole block. "Besides, your roses were ugly anyway." Then he shut the door in my face. I stood there, fists clenched, and that's when I decided, this guy's going down. I started small. Every time Gary did something shady, I wrote it down. The day his dog dug another crater in my yard? Documented. The night he left beer bottles on my driveway? Documented. The time he blasted music so loud at 2 a.m. that my windows rattled? Documented. I even upgraded my security cameras so there'd be no he said, I said, nonsense later. The real kicker came when I found something dead on my lawn, literally. A patch of my once perfect grass turned brown overnight, like something had burned it. I checked my footage, and there he was, 1 a.m., dumping some liquid from a jug across my yard. Herbicide. My lawn was his personal target practice. The next morning, I went straight to him. "I have you on camera killing my lawn," I told him. He smiled and said, "Oh yeah? Let's see you prove it." That smug look on his face. I can't even explain the rage I felt. He thought I was just some pushover homeowner who'd take it. He had no idea who he was messing with. I tried the HOA first, thinking maybe they'd care since they're obsessed with lawn aesthetics. But of course, they told me, unless he's breaking visible property rules, there's nothing we can do. Useless. The cops? Same story, it's a civil matter. Great. So apparently a neighbor can poison your grass. and it's just fine? That's when I realized, if I wanted justice, I'd have to handle this myself. But here's the thing. I'm not a smash his windows type of guy. I'm patient. I like plans. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Gary's life was a pile of loose threads, just waiting for someone like me to pull them. I started observing. His house violated about 6 HOA codes I knew of: peeling paint, a broken fence, and that rusty RV parked illegally on the street. His backyard looked like a junkyard with a half-built shed that definitely wasn't approved. His business? Some sketchy cash-only lawn service that didn't look very legal. The first move was easy. I filed anonymous complaints. Noise violations, improper vehicle storage, trash on the lawn. Within a week, he had 2 official notices stuck on his door. He was furious, stomping around and yelling about snitches. I just sipped my beer on my porch and smiled. Meanwhile, I started bringing my lawn back to life. It wasn't about the grass. It was about sending a message. Every time he looked over the fence, he saw my lawn getting greener while his life slowly started to crumble. The funny thing? He had no clue this was just the beginning. And trust me, the payback I had planned next, it would make him wish he'd never even looked at my yard. I thought I'd seen the worst of Gary, but I was wrong. This guy was just getting started. A week after my anonymous complaints hit him, he started doubling down. It was like he knew someone was coming after him, and he wanted to prove he couldn't be touched. One night, I hear this scratching noise outside my window at 1 a.m. I check the security feed, and there he is, dumping another jug of herbicide, this time right in the middle of my front lawn. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from pure rage. He wasn't just being careless, he was targeting me. The next morning, my yard looked like a crime scene. A huge brown patch, right in the center, like a scar. I confronted him again, holding my phone with the video queued up. "You're caught on camera, Gary. This is criminal damage. I can take this to the cops." He smirked. "Then go ahead. You think the cops care about your lawn? Good luck with that." He walked away, whistling, like he'd just won. And that's when something inside me snapped. I knew I couldn't rely on the HOA or the police. This was my war now. So I started digging, figuratively and literally. I spent hours online learning about local property laws, HOA enforcement rules, and city ordinances. I discovered that Gary's house wasn't just messy, it was a gold mine of violations. He had an unpermitted structure in his backyard. His RV was parked illegally on the street, and half his property line fence was technically on city land. The guy had been breaking rules for years, and no one had called him out. Until me. But I wasn't ready to strike yet. First, I needed evidence, real evidence. I upgraded my cameras to 4K and set them to record 24/7. I even installed a motion-activated light aimed directly at the side of my yard Gary liked to mess with. Every time he got close, it lit up like a prison spotlight. I wanted him to know I was watching. The tension started to build between us. We'd pass each other on the street, and he'd mutter something under his breath. One time, I heard him say, "You think you're smart, huh? You'll regret this." I'll admit, I started losing sleep. Every sound outside made me check my cameras. But I wasn't scared, I was planning. I began keeping a detailed log of every single thing Gary did wrong. Noise complaints? Logged. Trash violations? Logged. Illegal fire pit in his backyard? Oh yeah, I had video proof of that. Then came the night that really pushed me over the edge. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something shattering. I rushed to my window and saw Gary, drunk as hell, throwing beer bottles at my fence. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I called out, "What the hell is your problem?" He just laughed. "Your face is my problem," and hurled another bottle that barely missed my mailbox. That was it. That was the exact moment I decided my revenge wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist. I was going to break him. Not with violence, oh no. I was going to use his own stupidity and arrogance to destroy him. By the time I went to bed that night, I had a plan forming in my head, a plan that would take time, precision, and patience. But once it started, there would be no stopping it. And trust me, when the first phase hit him, he had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. I didn't want to just hit back. I wanted to dismantle Gary's entire life, piece by piece. But to do that, I needed to think like him, careless, arrogant, sloppy. And believe me, Gary's life had more cracks than a broken sidewalk. The first step of my plan was simple: information. I started digging into public records. Turns out Gary's house had multiple unresolved code violations from years ago. Stuff like improper fencing, a half-collapsed shed, and an old complaint about his RV being parked too close to the street. All of it had just disappeared because no one followed up. Perfect. Then I got a little creative. I went for a walk with my dog. Well, my friend's dog. Just to casually peek at Gary's backyard through the slats in his broken fence. What I saw made me grin. The guy had a fire pit built out of literal cinder blocks, with burn marks all around it. Totally illegal in our area. He also had a bunch of random junk piled up, rusted bikes, old tires, busted furniture. All of that was a code enforcement nightmare waiting to happen. And here's the kicker. Gary ran a small, cash-only, landscaping business. I overheard him bragging about how he never reports his income. So not only was he trashing my yard, he wasn't even paying his taxes. The more I learned about him, the more I realized I wasn't just dealing with a bad neighbor. I was dealing with a walking disaster. So I started phase 1, paperwork warfare. I filed anonymous reports with the city for every single violation I could find. Illegal fire pit, unpermitted construction, junk piles, RV parked illegally. I even included time-stamped photos I found online, aka from my cameras. Within 2 weeks, Gary had 3 separate city inspectors knock on his door. The first time it happened, I was sipping my coffee on my porch as a city truck pulled up. I swear, I could see the steam coming out of Gary's ears. He stormed outside, yelling at the inspector like a lunatic. From my porch, I heard, "This is harassment. Who reported me?" The inspector just shrugged and said, "Sir, we got multiple complaints." Multiple. I smiled at that. But I wasn't done. I tipped off the HOA about his unapproved shed. They love handing out fines. Within days, Gary got slapped with a warning letter. He ripped it up and threw it in the street, which, by the way, was another violation. I documented that too. By now, I could tell I was living rent-free in his head. He'd glare at my house every time he walked by, like he knew I was behind it all, but he couldn't prove anything. And that drove him insane. The best part? I kept being the nice neighbor in public. I'd wave, say "Morning, Gary," and watch him nearly explode with rage. Meanwhile, I was working on phase 2, something much bigger. I wasn't just going to get him fined. I was going to hit him where it really hurt, his wallet and his reputation. And trust me, what I did next made him wish he'd moved to another state before messing with me. Gary had no idea what was coming next. The fines from the HOA and the city inspections were just appetizers. I was preparing the main course, and it was going to wreck him. The key was his landscaping business. He ran this little cash-only operation, mowing lawns and trimming hedges for neighbors who didn't care about receipts. I knew for a fact he wasn't reporting any of that income. And you know what happens when the IRS hears about under-the-table earnings? They go nuclear. So, I wrote a very detailed, anonymous letter. I included screenshots of his Facebook posts where he bragged about cash only, no paperwork, photos of his truck with the business logo, and even a list of his recent jobs. Information I gathered by watching his every move. I mailed it straight to the IRS fraud department and smiled as I dropped the envelope in the mailbox. But I wasn't done. I also sent a separate anonymous tip to a local news outlet about unlicensed contractors operating in our area. A week later, a reporter did a segment featuring blurred photos of illegal landscapers. And guess whose truck was front and center? Gary's. The fallout was instant. Gary started losing customers. I overheard 2 of our neighbors talking on the street, saying they wouldn't risk hiring someone shady anymore. The guy's side hustle was bleeding out in real time. Meanwhile, I kept my pressure campaign rolling. I filed more HOA complaints, this time about his broken fence and the piles of junk visible from the street. The HOA sent him another letter, this one with a $500 fine attached. He was furious. One evening, I saw him tearing the letter to shreds and screaming into his phone, probably at his wife, who, by the way, had stopped coming outside at all. My lawn, on the other hand, had never looked better. I invested in some premium sod and fertilizers, and within weeks, my yard looked like a cover photo for a gardening magazine. Every time Gary looked over the fence, he saw my yard thriving while his was turning into a dumpster fire. That ate at him more than anything else. The next time we crossed paths, I smiled and said, "Hey Gary, need any tips for lawn care? Yours is looking a little rough." He glared at me like he wanted to murder me, but he didn't say a word. What he didn't know was that I'd set up the ultimate trap. I'd scheduled another city inspection, timed perfectly for a weekend when I knew his yard would be at its worst. Trash bags piled high, fire pits still covered in ash, and his RV parked right on the sidewalk. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was a full-scale dismantling of Gary's kingdom. And the best part? I wasn't breaking a single law. But trust me, the next phase I had planned would make all of this look like child's play. The first city inspection hit him like a slap in the face. But the second one? That was a knockout punch. I timed it perfectly. Saturday morning, when Gary was still passed out from his Friday night drinking, a city code enforcement truck rolled up. I was already sipping my coffee on my porch, waiting for the show. The inspector walked around Gary's property, clipboard in hand, writing down violation after violation. The illegal fire pit, the piles of trash, the rusted-out RV parked too close to the street, and even the leaning fence that was technically on city land. Gary came stumbling out in his sweatpants, yelling, "What the hell are you doing on my property?" The inspector didn't even look up. "Sir, you've been reported for multiple violations. If these issues aren't fixed within 30 days, you'll face additional fines." When I say Gary turned red, I mean he looked like a tomato that was about to explode. He started arguing, waving his arms, threatening to call his lawyer. The inspector just handed him a packet of citations and left. Total damage? Over $1,200 in fines. And that was just the beginning. Then came the IRS. I don't know how fast they move normally, but my letter must have landed on someone's desk at just the right moment. Gary got a notice in the mail about unreported income. I could see the panic in his face when he pulled the letter from his mailbox, scanning it like it might explode. For the next few days, he was on the phone constantly, pacing in his driveway, yelling into his cell. Meanwhile, his landscaping clients kept dropping him. One neighbor told me she'd overheard Gary begging for work, offering ridiculous discounts. Word spreads fast when someone's name pops up in the local news for shady business practices. To make things worse, the HOA wasn't done. The $500 fine I mentioned earlier? He refused to pay it, thinking he could outsmart them. Bad idea. They tacked on late fees, turning it into nearly $800. And if he didn't pay soon, they could slap a lien on his property. I'll admit, watching all this unfold was satisfying. But I wasn't just doing it out of spite. The guy had terrorized me for months, destroyed my lawn, and made my home life miserable. Now, for the first time, I could see cracks in his armor. His yard looked abandoned. His wife stopped talking to him completely, at least in public. His truck sat in the driveway with a flat tire for a week. And Gary? He started avoiding eye contact with me. One evening, as I watered my perfectly green lawn, he walked by and muttered, "This isn't over." I smiled. "Oh, I know. It's just getting started." Because my next move wasn't just going to hurt him financially. It was going to ruin his reputation in the entire neighborhood. Gary thought he could still intimidate me, but I was already 3 steps ahead. I didn't just want to hit him financially. I wanted everyone to see who he really was. And believe me, Gary was about to become the most hated man on our street. It started with a little community exposure. Our neighborhood had a group chat where everyone complained about minor stuff: lost packages, potholes, random cats wandering around. I decided to drop a few carefully chosen videos from my security cameras. Nothing illegal, of course, just Gary screaming at 2 a.m., throwing beer bottles, and letting his dog tear up my yard. I posted it with a simple message. Anyone else dealing with this kind of behavior? This has been happening for weeks now. The response was instant. Neighbors I barely talked to started chiming in. "Wait, is that Gary? OMG, he's the one who left broken bottles in front of my driveway. Yeah, he blasted music last weekend until 4 a.m. We thought it was a club over there." Within hours, Gary's name was the hottest topic in the chat. People were furious. I didn't even have to push it. The community turned on him all by itself. Then I took it up a notch. Remember those videos of him trashing my roses and hurling bottles? I sent a short compilation to the HOA board. I knew they'd eat it up, and they did. Not only did they find him again, but they also sent a mass email to the neighborhood reminding everyone about proper conduct and respect for property. The subtext was clear. Gary was officially the neighborhood pariah. And just when I thought it couldn't get better, I heard his wife screaming at him one night. Something about being an embarrassment and everyone knows you're a loser now. The next day, she packed up her car and drove off. I don't think she's been back since. Gary started spiraling. No more loud parties. No more acting like the king of the block. He stopped talking to anyone, and when he did come outside, you could feel the tension. People would cross the street to avoid him. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no. I got an idea, one final push to make sure he'd never show his face at a neighborhood barbecue again. I knew someone at a local community Facebook page, and I leaked the same videos there, along with a polite warning. Be careful who you hire for lawn care. Some people aren't exactly trustworthy. It went viral, at least as viral as a neighborhood drama can get. Suddenly, Gary wasn't just hated on our street. He was infamous across the entire subdivision. By this point, Gary wasn't just losing money. He was losing his mind. And I was about to deliver the knockout blow. Gary was like a wounded animal at this point. Angry, paranoid, and lashing out at anyone who so much as looked at him. But I wasn't about to stop. I'd been patient, strategic, and careful. Now it was time to pull the final trigger. The key to this last phase was timing. I knew Gary was behind on his HOA fines and probably scrambling to keep up with all the city citations. His yard was a disaster, half-dead grass, trash bags stacked like some kind of modern art, and that illegal fire pit still covered in soot. His RV, which hadn't moved in weeks, was parked halfway across the sidewalk. It was the perfect storm of violations. So I made a few phone calls. First, I contacted the HOA again, anonymously, of course, and mentioned that Gary hadn't been complying with any of their letters. I may have added that his yard was a health hazard and that kids in the neighborhood had tripped on his junk piles. HOA boards love that kind of drama. Next, I placed another anonymous call to the city code office, specifically requesting an inspection due to fire safety concerns. I made sure they came on a Saturday morning when I knew Gary would still be asleep and his yard would look like a landfill. The day came. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching as both a city truck and an HOA rep showed up together. You'd think the president was visiting with all the commotion they caused. Gary stumbled out in his pajamas, looking like he'd just survived a tornado, and started yelling, "This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer." The city inspector didn't even flinch. "Sir, you're now facing multiple citations and overdue fines. If you don't address these issues immediately, your property will be flagged for further action." Further action meant liens. And liens meant Gary could literally lose his house if he didn't pay. But the best part? I was recording the entire thing on my phone. Later that day, I sent the video, blurred faces, of course, to the neighborhood Facebook page with a caption, "City finally cracking down on code violations. About time." The comments blew up. People weren't just angry at Gary anymore. They were celebrating. Finally, someone's doing something about him. Should have happened years ago. Good riddance. Gary was officially the enemy of the entire block. And I knew I'd won. But I still had one final card to play. I called up my buddy, who happens to be a contractor, and asked him for a favor. We staged a little assessment of my yard while Gary was watching. Loud conversations about how my property value was going up while his was tanking. I made sure Gary overheard every word. That night, he stormed onto my lawn, red-faced and screaming, "You think you're better than me? You're ruining my life." I didn't even have to respond. My cameras were rolling, and my neighbor across the street was already calling 911. And that's when everything exploded, literally and figuratively. Gary was completely unhinged that night. The second he stormed onto my lawn, I knew this was it. The moment everything I'd been planning for would pay off. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, veins popping out of his neck, his face red like he was about to have a heart attack. "You think you can ruin me, huh?" he shouted, kicking over one of my garden lights. I didn't even flinch. "You should calm down, Gary. This isn't a good look for you." That only made him angrier. He got right in my face, close enough that I could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. "I'm not paying a damn dime to the city, the HOA, or anyone. And you're dead meat." The cameras were rolling, every second captured in crystal clear 4K. Across the street, my neighbor Tom was already on the phone with 911, narrating the whole scene. "Yeah, he's on his property, threatening him. Yeah, he's drunk and breaking stuff." Gary grabbed one of my rose bushes, yes, the ones I'd replanted, and ripped it out of the ground like some deranged caveman. That was it. I stepped back, hands up, and said loudly enough for the cameras and Tom to hear, "Gary, you're trespassing and destroying my property. The police are on their way." "Good. Let them come," he yelled, tossing the rose bush into the street. They'll have to drag me out of here. Oh, and drag him they did. It took less than 10 minutes for 2 patrol cars to pull up. The second Gary saw the flashing lights, he tried to bolt back to his house, but it was too late. The officers caught him right on the edge of my lawn. "What's going on here?" one officer asked. I pointed to my security cameras. "He's been harassing me for months. Tonight, he came onto my property, threatened me, and destroyed my landscaping. It's all on video." Gary tried to argue, slurring. "He's lying. He's out to get me." The cop turned to him and said, "Sir, we've already had multiple complaints about you. You're under arrest for trespassing, vandalism, and disorderly conduct." Watching them cuff him while he cursed and shouted was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. The whole neighborhood came out to watch, too. People were whispering things like, "Finally," and "About time someone did something." As they shoved him into the back of the police car, Gary glared at me like he wanted to burn my house down with his eyes. But it was over. He was finished. I'd won the war, and the best part? I did it all without breaking a single law. The night Gary got arrested felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. For months, I'd been living with constant tension, checking cameras, worrying about what fresh hell he'd unleash next. But now, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, exactly the way I wanted it. Gary spent a couple of nights in county jail for trespassing, vandalism, and disorderly conduct. When he got out, he didn't so much as look at me. The swagger, the arrogance, it was gone. He kept his head down, and within a few weeks, he vanished. I heard rumors that the HOA hit him with a lien on his house because he couldn't pay the fines, and the IRS was still digging into his shady business. The man who once thought he ran this block? He lost everything. The day a moving truck pulled up in front of his house, I stood on my porch and watched. No smirk, no gloating, just quiet satisfaction. Gary loaded his beat-up truck with the last of his junk, and for the first time, I saw it fear. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And then he was gone. A few weeks later, a sweet retired couple bought the house. Lovely people, the kind who bake cookies for the neighbors. We hit it off immediately, and now we have backyard barbecues every other weekend. The difference in the neighborhood is night and day. Everyone's happier, friendlier, like a dark cloud had finally lifted. As for me, I turned my yard into a masterpiece. I replanted my roses, installed new landscaping, and even won a Best Yard award from the HOA. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same HOA that couldn't help me when Gary was terrorizing me was now praising my yard in their monthly newsletter. I guess revenge really is a dish best served cold, and with perfectly trimmed hedges. But here's the thing, I didn't just get revenge. I grew as a person. I realized that I'm not as passive as I once thought. I can stand my ground. I can fight back, but I can do it smartly, legally, and without ever lowering myself to his level. These days, I sit on my porch with a cold beer, looking out at my pristine lawn. Every now and then, a neighbor will walk by and say, "Man, you really handled that situation with Gary like a pro." And I just smile and nod, because they have no idea just how much planning and patience went into winning that war. You won't believe what I did in the end? Well, now you know. I didn't just take down a toxic neighbor. I reclaimed my home, my peace, and my life. And that, my friend, is the sweetest victory of all. The night Gary got arrested felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. For months, I'd been living with constant tension, checking cameras, worrying about what fresh hell he'd unleash next. But now, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, exactly the way I wanted it. Gary spent a couple of nights in county jail for trespassing, vandalism, and disorderly conduct. When he got out, he didn't so much as look at me. The swagger, the arrogance, it was gone. He kept his head down, and within a few weeks, he vanished. I heard rumors that the HOA hit him with a lien on his house because he couldn't pay the fines, and the IRS was still digging into his shady business. The man who once thought he ran this block? He lost everything. The day a moving truck pulled up in front of his house, I stood on my porch and watched. No smirk, no gloating, just quiet satisfaction. Gary loaded his beat-up truck with the last of his junk, and for the first time, I saw it fear. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And then he was gone. A few weeks later, a sweet retired couple bought the house. Lovely people, the kind who bake cookies for the neighbors. We hit it off immediately, and now we have backyard barbecues every other weekend. The difference in the neighborhood is night and day. Everyone's happier, friendlier, like a dark cloud had finally lifted. As for me, I turned my yard into a masterpiece. I replanted my roses, installed new landscaping, and even won a Best Yard award from the HOA. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same HOA that couldn't help me when Gary was terrorizing me was now praising my yard in their monthly newsletter. I guess revenge really is a dish best served cold and with perfectly trimmed hedges. But here's the thing. I didn't just get revenge. I grew as a person. I realized that I'm not as passive as I once thought. I can stand my ground. I can fight back, but I can do it smartly, legally, and without ever lowering myself to his level. These days, I sit on my porch with a cold beer, looking out at my pristine lawn. Every now and then, a neighbor will walk by and say, "Man, you really handled that situation with Gary like a pro." And I just smile and nod, because they have no idea just how much planning and patience went into winning that war. You won't believe what I did in the end. Well, now you know. I didn't just take down a toxic neighbor. I reclaimed my home, my peace, and my life. And that, my friend, is the sweetest victory of all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Did he do the right thing?